live recording and I started live sharing. Looks like the live stream is working. Um, okay, so we can get started. This is more of like, kind of a conversation around EB1A. In this, we will kind of go over some of the criteria, some of the trends that we are seeing around EB1A. Um, and the goal is like to give more and more background to people who are looking for EB1A, whether they are on H1B and um, or whichever visa they are on, and trying to figure out a pathway for themselves. So let's get started. So Steve, maybe like we have done this session before with you. First of all, thank you so much for your time and being
Of
here
course.
and agreeing to do this session. Now, I think maybe we can get started because I know you have a lot of experience with O1 and EB1A cases specifically. So maybe you share a little bit about like what your immigration practice focuses on, especially on these type of cases.
Yeah, I think people get stuck in what I call the employer dependent cycle. It's like a vicious cycle that we see not only with H-1Bs, which a lot of people we know have had, but also other visa types like O1, where you can renew your O1 as many times as you like, but people don't often think about what maybe the advantages are of simply going for your green card. And I think there's also a myth out there that you have to have an O1 before you can get an EB1. There's also another myth that you have to be, you in fact, you just prefaced this whole session by saying whatever visas people are on. You can get an EB1A green card having never lived in the United States. You can process it from outside the US. So you can get a direct green card. And that's what breaks the cycle of dependence on sponsors who can decide from one minute to the next whether, they want to keep you or let you go, and then you're scrambling for another visa. Or in the case of people from India and China, being backlogged to the point of it being preposterous, right? Like it's 15 years you have to wait and continue to be sponsored and be an employee, and then maybe you want to start your own company and be empowered, and you can't do that. And so this is a way to break the cycle, and it's the golden ticket. It's like in the Willy Wonka movie, right? It's that chocolate bar with the golden ticket in it. It's your chance to be a green card holder without a sponsor and without a labor certification, which under this administration I think will be getting harder and harder also to get certified. So you're skipping all those steps, you're skipping the codependence, you're taking full 100% control of your own life. You don't even have to be in the US necessarily to make this a reality.
Yeah, I think that is like, I think a lot of people have that question that can someone who has never lived in the US get a green card? But I think EB1A is still like a pathway. I don't know. I have like, is it like a hard pathway? Like, or there are people who have been able to make it work without being in the US and getting the green card?
They cannot count it against you because you don't have experience in the US, because you don't meet the criteria with US based organizations or prizes or media coverage. The first EB1A case I got approved was probably 15 years ago. I was just launching my practice in New York after moving from Argentina, after being there 8 years, and this guy contacted me and said, I've been an executive in the advertising industry for the last 25 years. I live in the UK. I'm going to be winding down my company, but I don't want to be dependent on someone else. I need about a year, year and a half, and then I want to get a green card. We didn't. So I looked into it and I realized we could apply for EB1A, and we did. He got his direct immigrant visa without a sponsor, without a U.S. company, anything. Having never lived in the U.S., having never spent more than 2 weeks in the U.S. And the funniest thing was, we, as part of EB1A, and we can talk about this, there are three prongs. There's sustained acclaim, which is showing that you have recognition that's sustained. There is proof of benefit to US, where you talk about your future plans. And then there's the extraordinary ability criteria that we're going to go through. He had planned to start a new ad agency, And then to celebrate, he took me to dinner, and then he got on a flight to Hawaii. And he called me from Waikiki Beach 2 days later, and he said, "Steve, I'm retiring. I'm living in Hawaii," and that was it. He had his green card, which means, which is
Yeah,
crazy. Like our goal
yeah.
and most of our clients' goals is to create jobs and do things, but the green card is yours. Once it's yours to keep, and you can do whatever you want. You can pivot to anything you want to do, and that's the kind of freedom that we want people to have.
Yeah, I feel like family-based green card has something called as like a conditional green card, which is like, 2 years and then it extend. But looks like this EB1 is like one of those green cards, which is like, you get it, it's yours.
Yeah, for family-based cases based on marriage, you have to go through a 2 year conditional phase, then show maybe you're still married, maybe you're not, ask for a waiver. It can take up to 4 years for that process to be finished. This one is permanent residence directly.
Hmm.
From the moment, if you get an immigrant visa, you walk into the United States, you have every right and privilege of a green card holder. And that's it. You can, 5 years later, you can apply for citizenship. So it is the golden
Wow.
ticket. And I just want to say, Atal, before you ask, going back to your last question, because it's the golden ticket, it's also the hardest one to get. That doesn't mean it's impossible. That means that you can't do it halfway. And you can't make an assumption that because you just got an O1 approved, and this our clients say this all the time. I got my O1 approved. Can I just apply for EB1A? And the answer is it depends on how strong your case is. If your case is marginally O1, it's not even close to EB1. And so that's the most important message that I like to impart. And I know that OpenSphere and your team does a lot of profile building. I think that's incredibly important because the only people that know if it's EB1 level are the people that live and breathe it every day. And so that's my job, is to make sure we're not presenting cases until the cases are as strong as possible.
Got it. Steve, I think one thing which I have seen, and we will just like after that go on into the criterias. One thing I have seen is like a lot of people have a hard time understanding whether their case is like, kind of like close to EB1A, or like some people are like EB1A has like this kind of conception in mind that you gotta have like very researchers with a lot of papers to be able to go through EB1A, and it's not for business. Like, what do you say about like these conceptions that people have around the EB1A visa?
Well, I like to tell people first, stop looking in the public forums and on the internet for information. It's better to get it from the source, and that means people that do this every day. The great thing about EB1 is there are literally no restrictions on profession. All you have to show is that you're extraordinary in your field. So we've gotten green cards for luthiers who restore ancient instruments, for tattoo artists, for founders, for athletes. I mean, you name the profession, no matter how niche it might be, if you can show that, those the adjudicator should be checking off those boxes one by one, and it meets the threshold test for each category, and you build enough of those categories to build a solid case. It does not matter what field of work you're in, as long as you can show high level of recognition and standing in that specific field.
Got it. Yeah. Awesome. So now let's get towards the EB1A criteria. I think we can, kind of like go over each of the USCIS regulation and then kind of go into details. For this, I will just use more of the how the USCIS describes it, because I think that's kind of can be useful. So like USCIS has like says 3 out of the 10 criterias. If you meet, you basically qualify for EB1A. The first criteria here is evidence of receipt of lesser nationally or internationally recognized prizes or awards of excellence. Now, like, I mean, there were some things about like, okay, company awards can count or company awards cannot count. So maybe like we can even go into those, especially for people who are working for organizations.
Yeah, I think there's people need to understand there's two parts to this kind of process. There's the specific language, and what we're seeing under the Trump administration is what's called strict interpretation of the law. meaning down to each word of each one. So when you're reading the regulations and the criteria, you have to read them literally and make sure that that you're proving that every prong of that specific criteria is being met. So with the awards, for example, it says lesser awards. That doesn't mean that they're not important. The reason is that they're saying that is because above that in the regulations it says if you're the one-time winner of a major award like an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Pulitzer Prize, then you don't even have the requirement of showing 3 out of 10 normal categories because by default you are already considered to be elite. So we've had 3 green cards, EB1s approved in the past 6 months for Grammy winning artists. This is not to say that people need to win a Grammy to get the EB1. What it's saying is that lesser awards are the ones that aren't like these massively recognized awards, right? But if you are the most important journalist, let's say, in the Netherlands and you win the award for journalism in the Netherlands that's a national scale, and we can prove that it's a nationally recognized award, that is sufficient because that is your profession. You won the award on a national scale for their national awards. That is sufficient. So that's a lesser award, meaning it's not the Pulitzer Prize, which is global, right? But anything that we can prove that has a high level of recognition should be able to get you that. And the caveat here, and this is always changing, so this is why we constantly do these sessions, right? It's all because 6 months from now, USCIS might put out guidance, which is the second part of what I was talking about. You have the law and then the guidance. The guidance now says internal awards that are high level, it's not like, best associate producer of the month or something. It's like an annual award that's high level within a highly distinguished organization. So it can't be that you won best CEO award for your startup that has 4 people, right? You have to show that it's high level and it's a distinguished organization. But those kind of internal awards, like if you're at an Ernst and Young or you're at LinkedIn or one of these Fortune 500 companies and you win Employee of the Year or Executive of the Year, that sort of thing, we can make an argument that that qualifies under this specific category. So the people, whoever you're working with for your EB1, they have to be up to speed on what the new wrinkles are and the new interpretations. We have guidance that just came out in January that also gives us new sort of ideas as to what they're focusing on. So this is constantly evolving.
Got it. So if I think from, let's say, someone's perspective who is like working in an organization, looks like if they get Employee of the Year award, that can be possible scenario that they can be useful. What other things you feel like, people can do to be able to qualify for this criteria or like because I mean I think and like national award by itself is a little can be a little confusing. Like, is it like within the US or in your home country where you came from? What does that mean?
Well, remember what we said at the beginning of this is that
Mhm,
you're not required to have ever worked or even lived in the United States. So
mhm.
it's irrelevant what country. That's why I mentioned the Netherlands because we had a case where the person was a journalist and won an award at the national level awards. It doesn't say the official Netherlands government journalism awards. It has a name, right? It's called the De Techel Awards, but it's widely recognized as being the preeminent award for that profession in that country. So it doesn't matter where you're from. You could be from Bangladesh or Congo or anywhere in the world, but if there's a widely respected organization that has a national level award and you won it, then that's something that you can use. Like I said, you do not need to have worked in the US or any of your evidence has to be from the US in order to qualify.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. So the next criteria we have here is evidence of your membership in associations in the field which demand outstanding achievement of their members. So it's like more on the membership criteria, and I think this is also something which a lot of people want to build. So maybe your insights would be helpful.
Yeah, this is a category we use often. Um, and they're becoming, even with the new requests for evidence that we've seen in the past 4 weeks, they're becoming much more fine-tuned in terms of the specifics that they want to see. So number one, you have to prove that the organization that you're or association that you're a member of is national or international in scope. I mean, you're going to hear me use that expression often. Distinguished reputation and national or international in scope are the two parameters for judging whether an organization really meets the test, if it's giving you membership, if it's allowing you to judge, if it's giving you an award, right? It's you're only as strong as the organization that is backing that. And so in this specific case, what we try to do is, first of all, and this is very important, is you have to define the field. It's called the field of endeavor. You have to define the field for the person. So on the first page of our attorney letter, it says EB1A application on behalf of Fulano or whoever it is in the field of X. Right there from the first page, you're defining the field. And then everything has to align with that field. So a lot of our clients are in the field of computer science. They might do intelligence, Web3 tech, but they do some version of computer science or computer engineering. And so we use that as the field, and then everything under that is encompassed. That in order to prove each category has to be within that field. So if you're looking for membership, you should be looking for membership in organizations like if you're from India, IETE, IEEE. If you're in artificial intelligence, you have AAAI. Um, there's the Forbes Tech Council that people have used. Those are just to throw out some ideas. So those, like I mentioned, they can be based in India or whatever country you're from. They have to be national or international in scope, meaning their members have to come either on a national level, not provincial or local, and then or possibly international. The bigger the reach of the organization, the more powerful that membership is. And then what you have to prove, Atal, is the specific selection criteria used to select members, which should include requiring outstanding achievement. We've seen this in a few RFEs lately where they ask for proof that outstanding achievement is required. And now they're asking for bylaws. So for people who don't know what that is, the bylaw is sort of the corporate constitution. It's the rules, it's the underpinning and the foundation of the company and how it will run. And if there are in the bylaws specific mentions of the criteria used for membership, for selecting members, we can use that to bolster that argument. So you're looking for very serious organizations that have specific criteria, and they also have to be willing to name the members of the committee, because part of the requirement is that the members of the committee be experts in the field. So this is obviously very high level, but there's all those extra prongs that you have to meet. And so you have to make sure you're selecting organizations that are not just pay to play massive organizations, but ones that are extremely selective in nature.
Got it. The next criteria I see here, Steve, is evidence of published material about you in professional or major trade publications or other major media. Um, by the way, I'm also, along with this, I'm very curious. Do you think the order in which it's mentioned matters at all?
No, this is just the way that the law was published. All of them,
Yeah.
except for one, have equal weight. And I guess that leads me to the description of this category. Media is what I call one plus category. The reason I'm saying that is because if you have major media coverage about you, which means a profile piece or what they call a Q&A where you're interviewed that establishes you as an expert in your field, and it's about you in your field, but it's also professional publication or major media, meaning it's a business, let's say, or a tech, like a Tech Times or a Crunch or Wired, and or it's the major newspapers, let's say, where you're from, like the Bangladesh Post or the Tokyo Times or whatever, depending on what country you're from. Um, that solidifies the category of media but it also bolsters every other category because if the content mentions that you're a member of, I don't know, a very important fellowship like the Thiel Fellowship, or you're a member of IEEE, or you had a critical role at specific companies, that bolsters those categories, including one we're going to talk about, which is critical role in an organization of distinguished reputation. That solidifies the distinguished reputation of that entity, that organization, because it's mentioned in major media or major trade. And so media is king, as they say. Media is the most important. And I would say we almost never submit a case without media unless it's the kind of profile that you mentioned in the beginning, which is a scientific researcher who publishes articles and who might have patents, might qualify sort of as a behind the scenes person. And there are certainly strong cases for that where you don't need media. But if you're in any other profession where you're not qualifying under scholarly articles or under original contributions, which we'll talk about, then you're going to need the media category. And I highly recommend that people add that to their petitions before they submit them because that legitimizes them in many different ways.
Got it. So media was the third one. The fourth one I see here is evidence that you have been asked to judge the work of others, either individually or on a panel. I think my question, by the way, this is like the statement. So my question here is like definitely what is included. At the same time, like where do peer review paper count and how do they count?
Okay, great question. So, first, people should not be confused by the language. I get this all the time. You've heard this too, Atal. People say, I was in a panel at a conference. Well, it's not a panel of speakers, it's a panel of judges. What is important here is that whatever you were doing, you were judging your peers and the work that they do. So, peer review articles is the most sort of pure example, and we've seen this recently in what we've seen from USCIS in the last month is they are putting an emphasis on peer review. And we'll talk about the other option, which is kind of falling now a little bit more in terms of the standing, which is the hackathon judging. Peer review is literally why this category was created, and it means reviewing academic papers for journals, professional journals, so people are submitting potential scholarly articles to be published either in a journal or in professional conferences. A lot of conferences, tech conferences, business conferences have a published work, right, where they have the different articles by some of the people as contributors. If you are able to get published in those, you can qualify for scholarly articles, which is another category. But if you review them and you get a certificate from, let's say, Harvard Business Journal, for example, or you were at a major conference in your field and you were a judge of the papers that were submitted and you get a certificate, you qualify under that category. The hackathons we've seen in the last couple of years go from something that was the equivalent of peer review of papers to something that has a lot less weight now, and that's because they're everywhere, right? They're so ubiquitous that there's a hackathon. If there was a database of hackathons at all worldwide, I bet you there would be like 5 a day. And so even Stanford, Cal Hacks, Berkeley AI Hackathon, Harvard Hacks, MIT Hacks, like those were the creme de la creme. If you're not in one of those highly, highly touted hackathons as a judge, it's probably not going to pass an EB1 test. And the trends I'm seeing is that it's going further and further away from even those most prestigious hackathons. So it's not an automatic when you apply for EB1, if you were in Stanford Tree Hacks, for example, that will qualify you. And you may and you should, if you have the time to do it, submit yourself and volunteer for peer review of scholarly articles. That's the key to getting that category approved.
Got it. The next one we have here is the evidence of your original scientific. scholarly, artistic, athletic, or business related contributions of major significance to the field. So how can someone build their case in this category?
Well, there's two prongs, as you can tell from the language. They're very open in terms of what your field is. Like it even says artistic, right? The importance here is showing originality, and then the second part is the impact or the significance. Major significance means impact on the field. So the first thing I want to say for a lot of the people watching who are founders or who have worked for companies is that this is not the same as your critical role in a company. The impact that you show for critical role category, which we'll talk about, is internal. This is external impact as measured in the field as a whole. What it means is this is game changing stuff here, right? So we're talking about, like, we got one approver, it was a scientific researcher who encountered some sort of new subgenome in her research that was then cited 6,000 times, uh, which went along with her scholarly publications. She encountered or discovered something brand new, and the impact was measurable, which is very important here. The impact has to be measurable. So you can get, and we use subject matter experts who are aligned with the same specialization to confirm the originality and the significance. But if you don't have the measurables, it's very hard to prove. So if you're a founder, you're not just in the ideation phase, you're in the proof phase. You have solid proof of your product and the impact, like you have 1 million users worldwide or something like that, then you can clearly show the impact on the field. It's not just on the profitability of your company, it's nationwide, worldwide, or field wide, I guess. And that's where this is the most gray area category at all. I think this is one of the hardest ones to prove because it's not black or white. But you have to show that you're in that last phase where the product or whatever you've created is already being implemented and being used on an important scale, not by two people, but by lots of people. And then you get the subject matter expert letters to back that up. So this is not something that people will be able to prove if they've just launched their company. And that's where O1 to EB1 a lot of times, Atal, is a process. Like we'll say to them, until you're past ideation phase and you've implemented and it's successful and it's measurable, then we can present that category, but not until then.
Got it. So original contribution is definitely one of those where if someone has done decent amount of work, then that can be used for original contribution. But like if someone has is like early in their career, like it can be hard, tricky to prove this or bring out the original contribution.
Yeah, and if you've been an exceptional, let's say, software engineer for big companies, it's almost impossible to prove unless you have your own something you've patented, and then you would need letters from the companies that have used it to prove that it has an impact. So if you have letters from 5 companies saying we've used this original, contribution that this specific person was responsible for creating while they were at Apple or LinkedIn or wherever it might be, and that way you can show the reach and the impact with across lots of different companies. You could also potentially make that argument, but it's usually something that's very unique to that person. That's why patents are the number one cited way of showing originality. The thing about patents, as you know, being an engineer at all, is a lot of people can have patents that are pending, they can have patents that are active, but they may not be implemented. They may not be, in use, and therefore the impact is still hard to show.
Got it. The next category we have here is evidence of your authorship of scholarly articles in professional or major trade publications or other major media.
Okay, so this is the one that's most often confused with media about the individual in their field of work, because it's the same sources. It's major media, professional, or major trade, which is, for that specific vertical, right? Here you have to be the author. And what the EB1 focuses too is the first part of that is scholarly articles They are looking at the level of your writing and whether it's similar to uh, an academic type publication. So you might have, like, white papers are a great example of things that, if they're published, could be considered scholarly. If they don't contain citations, if you're just doing an off the cuff article showing off your expertise, then that's not going to be good enough. Which is interesting because, as you mentioned, this includes major media and major trade. It's not just scholarly publications, right, or professional publications. So you could be published in Forbes.com, which is a source of a highly respected business for that field of business. But if your article is very sort of off the cuff and general and it doesn't have citations, they can say, yes, this is major media, but it's not scholarly. This is the prongs that we talk about and why the language is so important. You need to make it look like a white paper, even if it's in something that's not a traditional professional journal. It should look like a high level academic type article. And here, this is where we've had people go back to their universities, if they've gone to school, and try to get published in the journals that those universities publish. A lot of people we work with have gone to very high level schools like you did in India, or if they've gone to school in the US, like I don't know, the Penn Business Review. We just had one that was in the Penn Business Review, and those were sufficient, right? So it's about the quality of what you're writing and then the place where you're publishing. But I would offer, my services to anyone, and write those white papers. A lot of those white papers are the underpinning of what becomes the conceptualized part of a successful startup, right? So channel that into scholarly articles, try to get those published, because then you have another category to check off.
Got it. One question, I think you touched it on it a little bit. I think a lot of people who are trying to get EB1 are might not be actually in the academic background. So how can someone who's like in the business background kind of like create work which is relevant to scholarly articles kind of work? Like how do they do that?
Yeah, well, I think what people need to understand, I do a lot of reviews of what are called RFEs, or requests for evidence, that are submitted by other attorneys. And
Mhm.
what I see, one of the biggest mistakes that these attorneys make is that they do the kitchen sink approach. And what that means is they try to qualify their candidates in every category. Now,
Mhm.
there are two categories that you'll mention that are more geared towards artists.
Mhm.
So maybe not those two, but eight. I've seen many RFEs where they tried to do eight categories, thinking, it's sort of like throwing something at the wall and seeing if it sticks. That metaphor, that's the worst possible approach. So there are people that may never have the capacity or the connections or the knowledge to write a high level scholarly article, and that's okay, as long as they're strengthening the other categories. So part of the triage that we do, or the case building we do, is we go for the categories that are realistically possible. Now, I'm guessing there's probably services out there that can help people to write, like ghost writers and things like that, that help you write strong content. So I don't think that this is an impossible thing, but you have to make sure that it's geared towards your audience in that field that we are defining you as being under, right? Which is the beginning, the foundation of the case. Um, so I don't think that anything is out of the realm of possibilities, but you have to
Mhm.
make it happen, and then you have to figure out when you've sort of maximized what you have or what you can do. So I don't think people should be trying for every category if some of those categories just don't apply to them, right? Like original contributions, I would say maybe 10% of our cases have that prong included because it's so hard to prove.
Got it. Okay, so the next category, which I think is more applicable on the artistic side, but you can give like, quick overview. Evidence that your work has been displayed at artistic exhibitions or showcases.
Yeah, so this is not, it's important that we don't discriminate here, right, Atal? If we have
Yeah.
artists or creatives that are interested, you try to form the evidence to fit, right? This is clearly written, and it's the language. Ironically, O1 says lead or starring role in productions or events. It's very different than the equivalent in EB1A, which is artistic exhibitions and display of work. So we've even had pushback on cases for fashion models where they say that when they do fashion shows that they are not displaying their own work. And we still have gotten those cases approved, but the pushback is because it's so literal. This is clearly designed for artists who create their own work and then they exhibit it, and you can show the exhibits or the showcases. Of course, that is great for artists if they want to argue original contributions, because the events or showcases are showing that there was an impact. Like, hey, I showed my work in Vienna and in Salzburg and wherever, and that shows that it had an impact. People saw it, and it's clearly original because it's my work. So there you've got two categories for people who are artistic. And that's the way that my mind works. We're always trying to dovetail evidence, right? Like I talked about white papers, scholarly articles. Maybe there's a patent that makes it original, so then you apply for original contributions. There's always ways to take evidence and to build it to be able to cover two different categories as well. So this one is good for people that maybe feel a little bit alienated now because a lot of the categories we've talked about may not fit them. But what we do for artists, for example, is we say, well, why don't you join the advisory board for a prominent cultural institution? And then they have a critical role in an organization. So there's always ways to add, but this is very case by case, Atal. If people are talking to service providers who just cut and paste cases together, they will not get an EB1A case approved.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, the next one is actually the one we were talking about, evidence of your performance of a leading or critical role in distinguished organizations. So, how do you think like someone can build a case for this?
So the challenge here is that you've got two prongs. You've got leader starring role, which the definitions are a little bit different. Um, and then you have the distinguished reputation part. So if your history of work experience, and this is where people with more work experience have an advantage, right? The longer you've worked, the more companies or organizations you've worked for, the more potential proofs you can use, right? It's important people understand that they don't need to have 10 of each thing. If you have one major media piece or you have one peer review that's very strong, that still qualifies you, right? So here, the chicken, there's this sort of dynamic where if you work at a small company, let's say you're a co-founder, it's very easy to prove that you have a lead or critical role in the company, right? But the distinguished reputation is harder to prove because the company is a young company. Maybe it doesn't have a lot of media coverage. That's where the media stuff really is important, proving the reputation. If you work at, a an Apple, for example, the distinguished reputation part is self-evident. You don't even have to document it because it's one of the biggest companies in the world. But you probably have a very small role in what's called the overall success of the business division or department of that business. So you need a very strong letter that talks about the internal impact that you had. And the adjudicators are definitely going to look at it three times because if you're one of 50,000 employees, how big could your impact be unless you are an executive level person, right? So this is a challenge, but this is where the media really comes. And a lot of our cases are young founders of companies. And this is so where the media coverage of and about that company is really useful because they've essentially said it without saying it that media coverage is what establishes distinguished reputation.
Got it. The next criteria here is evidence that you command a high salary or other significantly high remuneration in relation to others in the field. In this also, we can touch on a little bit on whether is the what type of the salary, what part of the salary is included versus not, and how do someone qualify?
Well, the good news about that is that it's not just salary because it says compensation, right? Other remuneration, which means, for example, what we would do is, let's say you're a computer scientist and the top 10% is what you're shooting for. Essentially, they want 90th percentile and above. It's determined by the geographic region where you live, which is another question we've had about O1 before, I remember. If you are in the top 10% earners in your specific field and in your profession, so that's where the field is what again defines what you're compared to. If you're in the top 10% in India and you worked in India and you can prove what the salaries look like in India or in any other country where you lived, that can qualify you. The US is easier because you have two sources that they cite. One is called the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The other one is called Career One Stop that they've just added to the guidance, which is also part of Department of Labor. So you can pull that up and show where the person lives, what their salary is, what the 90th percentile looks like. If they're above that in the US, for all the people who are an H-1B, a lot of people are very highly compensated, right? If they're engineers at big companies, they should be able to qualify. Um, this is for people who work at big companies or who get inordinately high salaries overseas. So if you were a co-founder of a company in Bulgaria and you paid yourself X compensation, what you do is you compare the total compensation for 1 year versus the salaries for that specific position in that country. And so we've had people qualify, like I say, who have never, like the first case I ever did was the person was in the UK and they were well above the UK 90th percent for what they were, which was an ad exec. And that qualified them in that category. So the numbers don't lie, as they say, but you can use total compensation. Let's say you got 10% of your equity paid out last year and your W-2 looks like bonuses, salary, and equity payout, and it's way above the salary average, then we present that because it is salary or other compensation. The only thing that doesn't count at all, this is a myth that people think can get them over the top, is equity. I have 50% in this company and it's valued at 25 million. If you're not cashing any of that out, it's all hypothetical because that company could close in 6 months. That's not considered compensation. That's a myth. People throw it in there to say, look at what this person can make. But you know this, having worked with a lot of people, the valuations are insane, right? They're trying to get, be able to exit and get investment. And so the valuations are inordinately high. That's not compensation. Compensation is what you have made or what you will make. So you can also try to use future compensation in the form of a contract that's signed to potentially use that, but it's not as strong as real compensation that's proven.
Got it. Um, I see. I think we just have the last criteria now, evidence of your commercial success in the performance art. So this is also for artists.
Yeah, and this is very difficult for artists because, and by the way, if people look at the language, it says CD or cassette sales. That's how old the law is. 1986 is the last time they changed the law. So the language is clearly outdated. And now we have to use things like number of listeners, number of listens, all sorts of, it's different parameters now for commercial success, but this is definitely something for singers, performers, actors. It's impossible, almost impossible to use this for a business or a tech related petition.
Got it. I think we covered pretty much like all the criterias for EB1A. I think one question sometimes I get is like you probably would know, it's like sustained acclaim or what needs to happen even when someone qualifies, like there is a final merits determination. Uh,
Yes.
what are those things? And we can touch a little bit on that.
So I think what people need to understand is that the legal standard is called preponderance of the evidence. What does that mean? It means that they can determine that you qualify in three of those extraordinary ability categories, which is the minimum or more. Once they've checked off three, you're done. They don't continue evaluating the extraordinary ability part. But you have two other prongs. And the first one, sustained a claim, part of that is the media. So here we go again. Media is a one plus, right? It's the most important category because if you have two or three articles that were in the past year about you, you can show that your a claim is sustained, right? On a national or international level. If you have articles from 10 years ago, that can qualify you still for media. Doesn't matter how old it is, as long as it's in major media or major trade. But it doesn't help with sustained claim. So what we do is we include 6 letters, what are called peer advisory letters, from experts in the field that also confirm the sustained acclaim and extraordinary ability of the applicants. And knock on wood, the hundreds of cases we've had approved, we've never had them question sustained acclaim. So don't think that you can just cite an article about you or the other evidence and say this person clearly has a claim. You need to add to that category and add those, bring in those experts. Because if you don't satisfy all 3 prongs, then you're not going to be approved, even though you qualify under the extraordinary ability thing. And the most overlooked one, I'd say, is proof of benefit to the US. This is very similar now to another category called EB2NIW, National Interest Waiver. You have to show that you are going to add benefit to the United States. And the most important way to do that, if you can, is the creation of new jobs, right? That's the incentivizing part of this. If you say, and I've seen cases that have failed, a lot of times, like I said, I'm brought in to look at cases that are not presented correctly. It will say, my goal is to work for Microsoft for the next 30 years and make lots of money. That doesn't add any tangible benefit. Yes, your profession is very important to the country, right? You're working in tech, and we want to be tech leaders of the world. But you're not adding individually anything because you can be replaced by another engineer, let's say, right? So if you're a founder, you want a business plan. We include the slide decks, the pitches, but we make sure that they incorporate some sort of chart for job creation. What's the hiring timeline for the next 5 years? Or if you are currently working for someone, you talk about your own entrepreneurial plans. Something that goes beyond just being an employee. If you don't do that, you can also get a request for evidence or potentially a denial if you can't prove proof of benefit to the US. To me, it's all about creating new opportunities for Americans. That's the icing on the cake, as they say, for the EB1A.
Got it. Um, I see some of the people have asked some question. We can probably like take some of these. Um, so I think we probably have answered this. Higher talent, Steve. EB1 is like an O1 on steroids in terms of the requirement and what's expected. Um, what would nominations for such award help prove sustained acclaim if not directly for the award category?
Okay.
What do you suggest that?
That's a really great question. I think you have to have some creativity in this. So I think Praveen's question is really good. I think it depends on the reputation and the scope or reach of that specific organization and what the award signifies. Right? If you are getting a nomination for Best Journalist of the Year in the Netherlands, going back to my example, that definitely shows a high level of acclaim. And I would definitely include that. There's nothing off the table when it comes to acclaim. I love the expert letters because it's all based on the strength of those experts. By the way, that first case I ever did, the first letter that we used for a peer advisor was Hugh Grant. So that was my first brush with fame. I wrote a letter and Hugh Grant sent it back to me in an email saying, "Cheers, Hugh Grant," or something like that. And I'm convinced that that already qualified my client for sustained acclaim because it was a powerful name. I'm not saying everybody needs Hugh Grant. I wish we could use him for every case. But for those of you who are too young to know who Hugh Grant is, then I don't know what to say. But it is about star power, but here Praveen's question is good. You can also bring in anything else. As I said, media is important, but when you're fleshing out sustained claim, you want to be able to cite a lot of these different things to make sure you're hammering that home. because it's totality of the evidence or preponderance of the evidence, the more you weight the rest of it, the more inclined they are to approve, right? Atal, if you have somebody that's a 50-50 and that third category is not maybe there, maybe not, but they see all this incredible benefit you're going to bring and all this acclaim, they're more likely to approve your case.
Got it. Next question I see from Jitendra. Does the IEEE senior membership counts?
So it's hard for me to say with 100% certainty if any organization counts. If you don't win a Grammy, Emmy, Oscar, Pulitzer, like it says in the beginning of the statute, then everything is fair game. What we have seen is in the guidance for '01 that IEEE is specifically mentioned as something that is considered. That's as close to a stamp of approval as I've seen. But what we've seen at all with some organizations, once they're known to be organizations that can help someone qualify, USCIS 6 months down the road is trying to disqualify it. I think what you need to do for membership is bring in all the good memberships that you can. That's why I mentioned the IETE that has bylaws that are in that really align with the requirements, and the triple AI. If you're in any you have any relationship to artificial intelligence, those are the ones that were named that we've used recently. I would definitely, if you can qualify for that membership, I would apply and I would use that in a case for sure.
Got it. Awesome. I think there's another similar question on this. Does being member of IEEE ACM counts?
Like I said,
Um,
it's hard. There's
go ahead.
no master list of organizations that you if you get in you qualify. That doesn't exist. And the most challenging thing for me as an attorney coming from a civil law country like I did from Argentina is you have this mentality from if you're from most of the world that the law is black and white, right? You can clearly qualify, but there are adjudicators that interpret the law differently. And that's why for EB1, because the push is to not approve, right? EB1, we haven't talked about this at all, and we should before we close. It has a massive advantage in terms of processing times for people. Like you can get a case approved in 3 weeks, but you don't have to wait 13, 14, 15 years like you might with an EB2 NIW if you're from India or China, or an EB3. You might have to wait a decade and a half to process your actual residence. Right now for India, there's a 3-year backlog. And if you have a previous priority date, you can use that, which means we can do an adjustment of status for EB1 approvals for a lot of the people. Most people that we help, if they're not from those two countries, they can process their green card right away. So because USCIS knows this, they make it really difficult to get approved, right? And so there is no magic list, but you want to go with the highest quality. The more selective the organization is, the more national or international in scope it is, and the closer its bylaws and its selection criteria talk about outstanding achievements, those are the organizations that you want to use. So with my clients, as we see cases coming back, we have more of an inkling of what those organizations are, and that is constantly evolving, but we would definitely share that sort of intel, if you want to call it that, with our clients.
Got it. I think that's pretty much I see the questions that we have got in the chat. One question is like, would you be able to share the recording? So yeah, we do take this recording and we put it on YouTube so you can see that too. But yeah, if anyone is looking for EB1A help, please feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, is there anything else, Steve, you want to share?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake people make, and we've seen this, we had a few cases that got pushed back recently, and that's because our clients insisted on submitting them by a certain time, and that was before this administration came in. And I think it's a big mistake to ever rush this because, as I said from the beginning, there's two messages that I want to communicate. One is that it is attainable, but it also is the golden ticket and the hardest thing to get. So that means you should take as much time to build your profile as it takes to get to that level. And if that means a year down the road, that's better than having a case rejected and having to start over. There is no possible benefit to rushing an EB1A case. You have to work with the right people that know how to build it, but then you should not submit a case because you feel like you have to have it. You should submit it when you know that it meets that threshold to be approved. That's the only goal that people should have. So patience and planning is the most important thing to keep in mind with when it comes to getting that golden ticket. You can do it, but you have to do it methodically.
Got it. Yeah. And the only other thing I would add is like we continue to do these sessions kind of like every 2 weeks. So we will have another one coming around March. We will keep you posted. So yeah, and thank you everyone for joining. There are around 200 people on X who are watching it. And yeah, so thank you everyone for joining. And if you have any other feedback, let us know. Thank you, Steve, for your time.
Thanks, Atal. See everyone soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you. Bye. So let me see if this gets
It
updated.
says it's already uploaded. It's incredible. I think that it wouldn't be a bad thing to share the recording because we'll constantly be doing updates. It's not like this information is, you know, will not change over time, right? So
Yeah, no, I'm gonna share the recording. Let me just make